I still remember the exact sound the restaurant made when it went silent. Not the gradual hush of a crowd realizing something is happening. No, this was instant. Like someone had reached into the air and turned off a switch. 300 people, clinking glasses, murmuring conversations, a jazz trio playing softly near the entrance. And then nothing. All because my 7-year-old daughter looked up at the most powerful woman in that building, a woman we had met exactly 47 minutes earlier, and said 2 words that changed everything. She said, "Hi, Mom, and I want you to tell me, I genuinely want you to pause right now and ask yourself, what would you have done if you were me in that moment?" Because what that CEO did next is something I am still not fully able to process, even now, months later, sitting here trying to find the words to describe it. So stay with me. This is a story about grief, and about grace, and about the kind of unexpected miracle that only happens when you've completely stopped believing in them. My name is Daniel, and I have been a single father for 4 years. My daughter's name is Lily, and she is, without any bias whatsoever, the most extraordinary human being I have ever encountered in my 36 years on this planet. She has her mother's eyes, these wide, dark, searching eyes that look at the world, like it owes her an explanation for how beautiful it is. She has a laugh that sounds like someone spilled a jar of bells, and she talks to strangers the way most adults talk to their oldest friends. She is fearless in the way that only very young children and very old people can afford to be. And she is the reason I get out of bed every single morning, even on the days when getting out of bed feels like the hardest thing in the world. Her mother, my wife Claire, passed away 4 years ago from an aggressive form of breast cancer that was diagnosed at stage 4. We had 9 months from the diagnosis to the day she was gone. Lily was 3 years old, barely old enough to understand what was happening. Not nearly old enough to understand what she was losing. Those 9 months were simultaneously the most precious and the most devastating of my life. We spent every moment we could as a family. We took Lily to the beach for the first time. We read every book. We watched every movie. Claire recorded voice messages for Lily to open on her birthday every year until she turns 18, a detail I cannot talk about for too long without my voice breaking. And then she was gone, and it was just the 2 of us. I threw myself into work after Claire died, partly to keep moving because stillness felt dangerous, and partly because Lily needed a roof over her head, and I was determined that grief would not take that from her too. I work in marketing, and I had spent the better part of a decade building something of a reputation for myself in the corporate event space. I specialize in designing experiential marketing campaigns for companies launching new products or rebranding. It's the kind of work that keeps you on your feet, always pitching, always presenting, always performing. It suited me perfectly in those early years because it kept my brain too busy to fall apart. About 8 months ago, I got what I can only describe as the opportunity of my professional lifetime. One of my contacts at an agency called me and said that Meridian Group, a massive consumer goods conglomerate that had recently gone through a full corporate rebrand, was looking for an outside consultant to lead the marketing campaign around their new identity launch. They wanted fresh eyes, someone not already embedded in their corporate culture, someone who could pitch to their executive team and convince them that their new brand story was worth telling in a way that would actually move people. The budget was significant, the visibility was enormous, and the person I would need to win over, the person who would ultimately make the decision, was the company's CEO, a woman named Margaret Ellison. I had heard of Margaret Ellison the way most people in my industry had heard of her. She was 44, had risen through the ranks of the consumer goods world, with a combination of fierce intelligence and what people described, depending on whether they liked her, as either visionary decisiveness or ruthless efficiency. She had taken over Meridian Group 6 years ago, when it was bleeding money, and turned it into a market leader in under 3 years. Business publications loved her. She gave very few interviews. She was known for being demanding, precise, and not particularly interested in small talk. She had never married, had no children, a fact that various profile writers had noted with varying degrees of inappropriate fascination, and was, by every account I had gathered, brilliant and somewhat intimidating. I spent 6 weeks preparing my pitch. I am not exaggerating when I say 6 weeks. I researched Meridian's entire history, their previous campaigns, their competitor landscape, their consumer perception data, their social media sentiment, everything. I crafted a campaign concept I genuinely believed in, something rooted in the idea that the company's rebrand wasn't just a new logo, but a new promise to the families who used their products every day. I built decks. I rehearsed presentations. I stress-tested every possible question they might throw at me. I was ready. The pitch meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning at Meridian's headquarters downtown. And then on Wednesday night, my regular childcare arrangements fell through completely. My neighbor who normally watched Lily when I had early morning obligations had a family emergency and had to leave town. My sister, who is my backup in these situations, was traveling for work. I spent 3 hours on the phone trying to find a solution and came up empty. I had no one, and I could not miss this meeting. It wasn't an option, so I did something I had never done before in my professional life. I brought Lily with me. I packed her backpack with her iPad, her headphones, her coloring books, a snack bag that could have sustained a small expedition, and I sat her down and had a very serious conversation with her about what it meant to be quiet and patient, while Daddy talked to some important people. Lily looked at me with those enormous eyes and said, very solemnly, "Daddy, I know how to be professional." She was 6 at the time. I nearly laughed and cried simultaneously. The people at the reception desk at Meridian's headquarters were, to their enormous credit, absolutely wonderful. One of the assistants was clearly charmed by Lily and set her up in a comfortable waiting area right outside the conference room, with a little table and a chair that was slightly too big for her, which she seemed to find thrilling. I went in and delivered what I believe was the best presentation of my career. I was focused, I was passionate, and I meant every word of what I was saying about why this campaign mattered, and how we could make it resonate with real people, real families. Margaret Ellison sat at the head of the table the entire time, and she was every bit as sharp as her reputation suggested. She asked hard questions. She pushed back on 2 of my projections. She challenged my timeline and made me defend it point by point. And I did. I held my ground on what I believed in. I conceded gracefully on the things she was right about. And when it was over, she looked at me for a long moment and said, "I'll be in touch by Friday." Not warm, not cold. Precise. I walked out of that conference room, feeling like I'd just run a marathon. Lily was still sitting at her little table, which she had apparently transformed into what she called her office, with her coloring books spread out like documents, and her juice box positioned very importantly at the corner, like a coffee mug. She looked up at me and asked, "Did you win, Daddy?" I told her I thought I had done a good job. She nodded seriously and said, "Good. I was professional the whole time." She absolutely had been. We were heading toward the elevator when I heard footsteps behind us and turned to find Margaret Ellison herself, not an assistant, not a representative. Her, walking toward us with her jacket still on, and her expression slightly different than it had been in the conference room. Softer, maybe, at the edges. She looked down at Lily and asked her name, and Lily told her, and then Margaret crouched down, a CEO in a several $1,000 suit, crouching down in a corporate lobby, and asked Lily what she had been drawing. And Lily, being Lily, launched into a detailed description of the picture, which was apparently a family of frogs having a picnic, and Margaret Ellison listened to every single word of it, with what appeared to be genuine attention. Before we left, Margaret looked up at me and said something I wasn't expecting. She said, "Your pitch had something a lot of these don't have. You talked about families like you actually understand what they need from a brand. Like it mattered to you personally." I told her it did. She looked at Lily for a moment, and then back at me and nodded, and that was that. Friday came, and I got the call. I had the contract. I was Meridian Group's campaign consultant, and I was going to be working closely with Margaret Ellison's executive team for the next several months. I am not ashamed to say I sat in my car in the parking garage and cried a little, because I knew how much this meant for Lily's future, and because I could feel somewhere deep and irrational, that Claire would have been proud. Working with Margaret was intense. She was exacting and brilliant, and she did not suffer vagueness or imprecision, but she was also fair in a way I hadn't fully anticipated. When I was right about something, she said so clearly. When I was wrong, she explained why without cruelty. Over the weeks, we fell into a working rhythm, and then somewhere in that rhythm, something shifted. It was subtle at first, an extra few minutes at the end of calls. A coffee that turned into an hour-long conversation about the direction of the campaign that drifted, at the edges, into other things. She asked me once, carefully, about what it was like to raise a daughter alone. I told her, honestly. She listened in a way that felt different from professional listening. I started to understand, gradually, that behind the precision and the reputation, Margaret Ellison was profoundly alone in her own way. She had given her 30s entirely to her career, at the cost of almost everything else. She had made the choices that her ambition demanded, and was only now, in her mid-40s, beginning to reckon with what those choices had meant for the rest of her life. She never said this directly. But it was there, between the words, in the pauses. About 3 months into the contract, she invited me to a dinner. A proper one, not a working dinner, though she framed it initially as a chance to discuss the final phase of the campaign rollout. I knew it was something more than that, and I went, and she knew I knew, and neither of us addressed it directly until somewhere around the second glass of wine when she looked at me and said, "I think I'd like to spend more time with you, outside of work, if that's something you'd be open to." I told her it was. I told her honestly that I hadn't opened that door in a long time, and that there was a little girl at home who was the first thing I thought about in every equation. She said she understood. She said she wanted to understand more. She met Lily 2 weeks later. I had spent days preparing Lily, not in a pressuring way, just talking gently about how Daddy had a new friend, who was very nice and very smart, and who might have dinner with us sometimes. Lily had asked approximately 40 questions, including whether this friend liked frogs, which I said I would have to find out. Margaret came to our apartment for dinner, and I cooked, and Lily interrogated her with the focused energy of a very small detective. Margaret answered every question thoughtfully and truthfully, and did not talk down to her. At one point, Lily asked Margaret if she was lonely, the way children ask things that adults spend their whole lives carefully not asking, and Margaret was quiet for just a moment before she said, "I used to be. I think I'm getting less lonely." And Lily nodded like this was the correct answer, and went back to her pasta. Over the following weeks, Margaret became a presence in our lives. Not a replacement for anything, not a performance of something, just a presence. She came to Lily's school art show. She sat next to me at Lily's Saturday morning swimming lesson and watched with complete focus, like a person witnessing something important. She learned that Lily's favorite color was the kind of green that's almost yellow, that her best friend was named Sophia, that she was afraid of thunder but not of lightning, and that she had very firm opinions about how a grilled cheese sandwich should be constructed. She brought Lily a book about frogs one afternoon, a real one, a nature book with photographs, and Lily received it with the solemnity of someone being handed something precious. And now I need to bring you to the moment I started with, because this is the part of the story that I still turn over in my mind, like a stone I keep finding in my pocket. We were at a charity gala dinner, the kind of formal event that Margaret's position required her to attend. She had invited us, both of us, and I had dressed Lily in a velvet dress that she was enormously pleased with, and we walked into that restaurant together, this big, chandelier-lit, flower-arranged, string quartet space full of executives and philanthropists and people who ran things. Lily held my hand and looked around with her wide eyes taking everything in. Margaret was already there, across the room, and when she saw us, something happened to her face that I can only describe as relief. We made our way over to her, and Lily, who had been quiet with the particular quietness of a child absorbing a new environment, looked up at Margaret in her formal dress, in this grand room, surrounded by all these important people, and for a moment she was still, and then, in a voice that was not loud but was perfectly, completely, crystal clear in the way that children's voices somehow always are in quiet rooms. She said, "Hi, Mom." The silence was immediate. The table nearest to us stopped. Then the next one. The ripple went outward fast, the way these things do, because people at events like this are always half listening for something worth paying attention to. Within seconds, that entire section of the restaurant was still, and people were looking at us, at Lily, at Margaret, waiting. I felt my heart stop. I did not know what to do. I opened my mouth with absolutely no idea what was going to come out of it. And this is the moment I want you to think about, right now, before I tell you what happened. Lily had never called anyone that before, not once, in 4 years. She had not used that word for anyone. She knew about her mother, she talked about her mother, she had a photo of Claire on her nightstand that she said goodnight to every evening. She was not confused about who her mother was. She had chosen this. She had looked at this woman, in this moment, in this room, and she had made a choice with that enormous, fearless heart of hers. I want you to think about what you would have done if you were Margaret. If you were a person who had spent your life building walls, who had never had this, who had walked into this dinner carrying all of that history and all of that loneliness, and a 7-year-old child looked up at you in front of 300 people and called you Mom. Because here is what Margaret Ellison did. She did not laugh it off. She did not look embarrassed. She did not correct Lily with the practiced grace of an adult managing an awkward situation. She went completely still for 1 breath, 2 breaths, and her eyes filled with tears, not 1 or 2, actual tears, immediate and unguarded. And then she crouched down in that formal dress on that polished restaurant floor, and she opened her arms, and Lily walked straight into them like she had been doing it her whole life. And Margaret held her, and the whole restaurant stayed silent. And I watched this woman who ran a billion-dollar company hold my daughter and cry quietly into her velvet shoulder, and I think I will carry that image with me for the rest of my life. When Margaret stood up, she was still crying a little, not trying to hide it. She looked at me over Lily's head and she said, in a voice that was not quite steady, "Is that okay?" And I told her, yes. I told her that was more than okay. I told her I thought Claire would have loved her. And then I was crying too. And Lily stood between us holding both of our hands, looking up at us with those searching eyes, apparently very satisfied with how things were going. The restaurant slowly went back to its conversation. Someone started clapping softly at a nearby table, and then a few other people joined in for a moment, and then it faded, and the evening went on. But everything was different. The way a room feels after lightning. The same room, the same walls, but charged with something new. That was 7 months ago. Margaret and I are together now, officially, genuinely, in the way that means you stop performing and start actually being in something with another person. She has not called herself Lily's mom again, and we haven't pushed it, because Lily leads and we follow, and that is the only way I know how to do this right. But Lily calls her Maggie, in a tone of voice that carries its own kind of weight, its own kind of belonging. Margaret comes to swimming lessons. She knows the correct grilled cheese construction method. She has been present for 2 thunderstorms, during which Lily does not want to talk about lightning, but does want someone nearby, and Margaret has been nearby both times without making it into something it isn't. I think about Claire. I think about her every day, and I do not think that will ever change, and I don't want it to. I think she is in Lily's laugh, and in the way Lily sees the world as something that owes her an explanation for how beautiful it is. And I think that sometimes people come into your life, not to replace what you've lost, but to remind you that love is not a finite resource, that grief and joy can exist in the same house, that your heart does not have to choose. What my daughter did in that restaurant terrified me and broke me open and showed me something I had not known I was still capable of feeling. She did it the way she does everything. Without hesitation, without calculation, without fear. She looked at the world and made her choice and trusted that the world would catch her. It did. Margaret caught her. I am still catching my breath. If this story moved you the way it moved me every single time I think about it, please hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this. and it means more than you know to those of us who put our hearts into sharing them. And I want to hear from you in the comments. What did you think when Lily said those words? What would you have done if you were Margaret in that moment? I read every comment, I mean that, every single one. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, because this channel is built around exactly these kinds of stories. Real, human, messy, beautiful, surprising moments that remind us what we're actually doing here. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded today that life still has the capacity to astonish you. That the most important moments don't announce themselves. They just arrive. Small and enormous all at once, in the voice of a 7-year-old, in a velvet dress. Thank you for being here with me. I'll see you all in the next story.